Hello internet, and today's video is going to be my December wrap-up. And I read a lot of books in December. I am really excited for this new year because these last couple of months of 2017, they have been so good in the reading spectrum. I have read so many on audiobooks, I've read so many in physical copies, and I just want to keep this going. I'm tired of looking at these shelves and wondering which books I've read and which books I haven't, because I want to have shelves where I've read everything. So let's get through the books that I have read in 2017, the last books that saw my eyes when we still called it 2K17, the year that everything went to shit for me. And let's get into this. So first we're going to talk about books that I read on audio that I do not own. So we're going to mention a series, and that is Every Heart a Doorway. And then Down Among the Sticks and Bones. This is a series of sorts. I can't remember the author's name, but like the pictures will show up so you'll know which books I'm talking about. These were both on audiobook for me. As far as I'm aware, this is a kind of companion-ish series, so not every book needs to have the book previous to it read for you to enjoy it, but preferably if you read it in the order that they are released, you will enjoy them a lot more. So Every Heart a Doorway introduces you to this kind of home for children who have experienced life in different worlds. They have entered a doorway, like going to Narnia or like in The Magicians or something like that, where they have entered into another realm and they have lived there, and now they're back in the normal world, the world that we all come from, and they're struggling to deal with it. And we meet all of these different kids in this home and all of their different stories. This first book was okay for me. Every Heart a Doorway was an interesting concept, and I kept really mulling it over, and I just think it's the happenstance of, it's a lot more interesting when you enter into these fantastic worlds that they're talking about than just hearing about them complain that they can't go back while being in the boring normal world. So this book is one where you just have to go into it and realize that nothing fantastic is gonna happen. We're just gonna be in the normal world dealing with weird normal person problems and not seeing all of these amazing, interesting places that have been mentioned that these kids have been living in and been a part of for such a long time. It does have a pretty interesting little mystery sort of thing that it tries to add in, and that does bring it back from just being a hey, let's not visit any of the interesting worlds, let's just talk about them sort of thing. But again, this first book really isn't what grabs your attention and really rocks you to the core, and I think that's just simple. We like being in the interesting worlds, not just hearing about them. So the second book, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, it goes along with this series. We talk about two characters that we met in the first book, and this just tells the story of how they grew up and then how they came to be in that world that they entered a doorway to get to, and kind of what happened in that world. I definitely preferred this book, once again, probably because I was in this interesting world that I had never seen before. I got to see the reactions of these kids and how they dealt with this new exciting thing and actually experience it with them, rather than just hear them tell me a story about living in this world once upon a time. So I think this is a great series. I definitely love the concept of it. I've never really thought of it before, but it is a pretty interesting concept. So I would love to see this series continue. I know it has a third book and I want to eventually read that, but I would love to see this series continue and be a really long series where I get to explore new worlds. They're very short books, very easy to get through, so definitely worth your time if you were intrigued by that sort of weird, what would happen if you just were walking down the road one day and you appeared in a different world. So the next book that I read that I don't own is His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. Someone had commented down below on one of my videos about this when I was complaining about wanting more dragon books and wanting more books where dragons were main characters you really got introduced to and got attached to and got to love. So I loved reading this book. I thought it was really, really good. This is a Napoleon Wars book. It takes place during the Napoleon Wars, except dragons are a entity that exists. So they are used for aviator forces, and you own a dragon or you are a companion to a dragon if it bonds to you, and then you help your respective army. A naval officer ends up being bonded to this dragon, and no one really knows what type of dragon this is, and he becomes a part of this aviator dragon force elite team, and we get to see him switch from there. We get to see this new dragon, we get to see other dragons and that sort of thing. I really love the part of this book that focused more on like them talking with the dragons and the companionship of the dragon and the human. I love the respect given to the dragon, and like just seeing how humans reacted to dragons, but also how this man who really truly loved and respected his dragon and thought of his dragon as a friend thought of his dragon, right? And the varying degrees of how this whole relationship thing worked. I don't think it's an action heavy book. It does mention some action and it did have action in it, but to be honest, during the action scenes I would often space out. It wasn't really something that I was like, oh wow, amazing, and I wasn't encaptured by it. So I think the type of action that happened in this book may have been more awing and like beautiful to watch if it was on the big screen rather than just being described to me. It just didn't work well for me when it was described. But I did love the dragon part. I did love watching the dragons. I love seeing everyone interact. So it was really definitely good for that, and I really enjoyed it. So now on to books that I own, so I don't have to look at a list all the way over there to try to remember to tell you about. And the first book on there is going to be The Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. Now this is the second book in the Red Rising trilogy. It's not a trilogy any longer, but I'm only gonna read these 3 books. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with this series and with Pierce Brown because I'm really, really intrigued with it. It's sort of like a gritty Sparta 300s type story, but it's more sci-fi. So it has that feel, right? That feel of Sparta, that feel of 300 that you get. But I often remember that those aren't my most favorite movies because I like a lot more heart and character into my books, where these books and those sorts of movies aren't so much about the heart, but about like the gritty reality of like fighting your way to the top and revolution and like that sort of thing. So I love it. Like I love seeing these battles and these extravagant plans and like the betrayal and this and that, but it doesn't give me that heart that I want, that hopefulness that I like to have when I read books, so that I can fully love and appreciate this book. So I love and hated this. It was good. There were some parts where I was just like, ugh. There were some parts where I was like, ugh. There was some parts where I was like, hell yeah. And yeah, that's basically how it went. This book does end on a cliffhanger, so I'm glad I have the next book, but because of my feelings around this whole series, I definitely know it's something I'm going to have to build myself up to versus I can just binge read it. It's not like bingeable for me, but it's definitely worth a shot if you're really into movies like 300 or love TV shows like Sparta. Next book we have The Girl from Everywhere by Heidi Helgeek, and this was okay for me. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it's okay. So when I picked up this book, I was thinking it was gonna be about a girl on a ship. She's time traveling everywhere because she's the girl from everywhere, from every time, from every place. It's just gonna be time travel and all this awesome things. We're gonna see different parts of history and all this amazing stuff. But that's not what this book focuses on. Like, yeah, the girl can time travel, and yes, they're on board a ship and they can figure out how to time travel and stuff. It wasn't really explained, but like they can navigate through time or whatever. But most of this book takes place in like 1800 Hawaii. Yeah, essentially what times in the 1800s. I believe it was before Hawaii became a U.S. property, and was when they still had their kings. It was right before America came in, kicked out the kings, and we're like, we're gonna take over your place because we're a bunch of assholes and colonization. So this was okay for me. I was really disappointed I didn't get to time travel everywhere. I was highly disappointed in some of the characters. Just, oh, the Boy Scout character. I cannot stand those characters. They get on my nerves, and there was definitely one of those in here. And I was sort of disappointed with the treatment of history given for this sort of thing, and it just reminded me of how sad I get when I hear about colonization, and especially when it comes at the expense of another person's culture, and just some of the things said. And I don't think this is one of those books that is like, oh yeah, it's like it's unintentionally rooting for those things or it's unintentionally promoting those things, but it was definitely a book that showcased those things in a way that I was just like, I'm not happy seeing this and remembering this event in history, because all it does is sadden me. And I didn't like how one of the plot points for it, and it being like Hawaii and how Hawaii became a part of America, the way that they wrote it here, it just, I don't know, it took away some of the gravitas for how that came about in reality by putting in this fiction, which didn't add to the history, but I thought took away from the gravitas of how just devastating it was to some people and the serious nature of the sort of things that go on with politics and conquering and that sort of thing. And just, I didn't like how it was handled in this book. And I don't know, I was okay with this book. It didn't impress me because it didn't have great like time adventure things, and I'm a huge fan of time travel, so I wasn't impressed. And that's it. That's all I can say. I might read the second book if they have more time travel-y stuff. I did like the one point in which they traveled to a different time. That was really interesting. But other than that, it was Now we have a sci-fi book by Melissa Landers, Starflight. This is a first in a series. This is about a girl who ends up getting like criminal tattoos, and she wants to get to the outer realm where she won't be judged by her tattoos anymore. And she ends up getting together with this boy who used to bully her in school, and she ends up becoming like an indentured servant to him. Turns out he's now on the run from the government, and they have to help each other survive, and they end up on this weird ship filled with weird people. And I really like this book. Like, it's not anything wow to write home about, but I enjoyed it. It was just such lighthearted fun. I like seeing the relationship between these two people where they were really not nice to each other. It was like, it's one of those hate to love relationship sort of things, and I liked the build of that. I mean, it was very tropey. It wasn't like the highest pinnacle of literature I've ever read, but I just loved it in spite of everything tropey going on in there, because I just like seeing the characters. I like seeing their struggles. I like just seeing the common story and how lighthearted and how much fun I had with it. So I don't have anything bad to say about this book because I just enjoyed it. Next we have The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. And this book was amazing. This is a 5-star book for me. Like, this was just so good. So this is about a girl whose older sister ended up getting raped and murdered by someone, and she is now in high school. It talks about her. It follows a girl that she meets and becomes friends with, and a boy that notices her often, and she ends up befriending and later having some sort of romantic relationship with. And we really just discuss rape culture and vengeance and the story of like just all of these sort of things. And I really liked how the characters weren't great upstanding characters, but they weren't horrible people. And I guess this book really just spoke to the bloodlust part in me, where when people do awful things to other people, you just want awful things to happen to them. And I really loved this book and how it was done, and I liked it. That's like all I'm gonna say on it. I really enjoyed this book. I really think It's a great book. Next, we have Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is the first book in a series. This was a really good book. This takes place in a world where everyone can live on forever because they figured out the key to not dying. You can still die, like if you get run over by a car or whatever, but you can end up being revived. So death really isn't a thing. It's more like a deadish thing. Like you can be deadish and then come back to life. So to stop the world from overpopulating, the human race has come up with a thing called the Scythedom. And the Scythedom is a collection of people who are specially selected who are reapers of the world. They call themselves Scythes, but their goal is to cull down the human population, to kill those people around the world just so that it doesn't become overpopulated. So if a Scythe kills you, you're dead. Like you cannot be revived. You're just dead forever now until the end of time. So this talks about two kids who end up becoming apprentices to a Scythe, and then them becoming involved in this organization, learning more about it, and then them racing to the end to figure out who's going to become the Scythe, because only one can become a professional killer. And it was really, really good. So yes. Next we have Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older, and this was really fun for me. I think it had some rush points to it, but overall it was a pretty entertaining book. This is about a girl who finds out that you can write spirits or draw spirits into paint, that art means a lot more, and it has this sort of spirit world thing to it where she has to discover her history because no one tells her anything because she's a girl and she's not allowed to know, and you know, stuff like that. So she figures out that she and her family have this connection to spirits around them, to their ancestors, and through painting and through art they can bring those spirits back to life and give them like sort of a second life through the art around them. And she realizes that there is somebody after her and after people like her trying to kill them. So she's in a race for her life and for the life of the people around her. I think it was pretty good. It was an okay book for me. I definitely loved the cultural atmosphere. I definitely like seeing this new way of viewing spirits that is the non-Western way of viewing spirits, because we have a different perspective when it comes to the West of how we perceive death and stuff, where in Latin America it's a very different feeling. So I love seeing that sort of thing. Next we have The Giver by Lois Lowry. I've had this book forever and I finally decided to read it because I remember watching the movie so long ago and I was like, you know what? Let's see what the book was. So I read this one on audiobook. The audiobook's a little weird. For some reason they decide to put instrumentals in weird places in that book. And I was just like, shut up with the music. I just want to read the book. So this book is about a kind of utopian sort of world where everyone's the same, is given a job, you're assigned things, everything's perfect and everyone's perfectly placed. And this young boy at the age of 12 is given the job of the giver. And the giver's responsibility is to hold all the memories of humanity in their head and forever just have all of those memories and hold those memories and be the humanity's archive for all its pain, suffering, joy, any emotion that isn't meh, alright? So, this book was really good. I definitely think the book's a lot better than the movie. I think there's a lot of things that are easily explained and better explained with the way that the book chose to do it. I know it's really hard to find child actors that are really good, but I think the best part of this book was seeing such a young preteen, a kid on the cusp of being a child to learning more about the world and being a teen than it was when you just saw an 18-year-old do it, because it doesn't give you the same emotions. So I would definitely suggest reading the book instead. Definitely gives you a better perspective, a more detailed perspective. What a surprise, the book was better. Next we have Wreckless by Cornelia Funke. And I picked this book up because I recognize the author's name and I've read plenty of books by her, because I definitely didn't pick it up for the cover. This cover is god awful. But this book was pretty interesting. It is about a pair of siblings, the Wreckless siblings, and they discover that there is a mirror in their father's office where you can step through it and you enter into a thing that they call the mirror world. It's filled with fairies and like gem monsters and all these mystical and magical fayish things and goblins and dwarves and like all these sort of magical sort of things. So the eldest brother has lived in this world and has continually gone back to his world. Now his teenage brother, it's been years, his younger brother follows him in one day and ends up contracting the goblin rock demon thing. I don't know. Like he gets transformed and is slowly transforming into a rock creature through the magic of a dark fairy. And Jacob, who's the oldest brother, is going to try to heal his younger brother. And honestly, I didn't like this book. It was okay, but I think the biggest problem for me when it came to this book is I didn't like the idea that we could have such a fantastic, amazing world that was just full of possibility, this mirror world, and they would still be talking about the regular boring world. And I think this book would have been a lot better if it just focused in this mirror world, that we didn't know about this other world, or we didn't know about our reality or anything like that, because the entertaining fun parts was when we explored the mirror world and when we discovered more about the mirror world and about witches who lured children with candy and like in their gardens and all this weird stuff, and when we learned about the fairy island and how to get past unicorns and like all those things, those were fun and interesting. But when we had to deal with the humans doing with the human boring things and talking about getting back to the normal boring world, I was like, no, you're all sad and whiny, and I just want to learn more about the fae and what they're doing and why these rock creatures are the way they are and like what's going on in this world. I don't want to hear about going back to the boring world. Like, that's not what I'm having fun with. So it was okay. I didn't like any of the human characters, and I just wanted to stay in the magical world. I didn't want to deal with stupid, boring human world. No. Next we have The Love Interest by Cale Dietrich. I think I'm getting worse at saying names as this goes on. Point is, so this is about an organization called The Love Interest, and it's like a secret organization where they train individuals to become love interested to the rich and famous. So they figure out who has the most potential to become rich and famous and just have like some sort of power over the world, and then they send out secret operatives whose goal it is to get this potential amazing person to fall in love with them. So what they do often is they have a sort of battle between love interests, where they send out two prospective love interests to fight over one person. That person then chooses a love interest, and then they get insider information. So this follows two boys, and they are supposed to make one girl fall in love with either of them, and if they are the loser, then they're dead. That's it. They don't get to live on anymore. So I really like this book. I had such a great time with this book, but I think my favorite part about this book was the fact that we got to objectify males and see how horrible objectification was when it comes to other people, right? So often we talk about the objectification of women, and a lot of times it just rolls off the back of everyone because it's really hard to see a problem in something that you're just so familiar with and you're so used to. So it's really like hard to like, oh, that's what's going on. So I like to see this one where it was talking about the male love interest side, because then we got the objectification of men, and that doesn't happen as often. So we got to see the full ramifications of what happens to a person when you objectify them to an extent where you tell them all that matters about them is being pretty and fitting into this certain mold, and they're not allowed to be anything else. So I really like this book for that. There was some some weird writing error things that I just didn't get, where like there'd be parts where like the kid had taken off his clothes or something, and then he woke up and like he had clothes on, or he fell asleep like fully dressed with shoes on and everything. But when he wakes up, he's only in his underwear. And, like, these are lines apart, right? I'm, like, reading down one page. And all of a sudden, this boy goes from wearing a ton of clothes to wearing none, or wearing no clothes to wearing some. And that was the only thing I really had an issue with in this book, was sometimes it was like the author forgot what they were writing about or what the scene before it was. It's sort of that thing where you think the person's in a building, but it turns out they're by a tree 2 miles away, and now you're really confused because you don't know how they got to the tree. Yeah, that happens sometimes in this book. But other than that, pretty good book. So the next 2 books are a part of a series, and that is Walk the Earth a Stranger and Like a River Glorious, both by Rae Carson, the same woman who wrote Girl of Fire and Thorns, a series that I truly, truly love. This is another trilogy by her. This one is slightly different. It's not in a fantasy world, but is instead in a modern world, talking about the time period in which the gold rush happened in America. So in 1849, when everybody moved to California seeking their fortune. So this covers the story of a girl who has the ability to see gold. Like, she has some sort of power over gold. She can feel it, she can sense it, she can control it in some capacity, and she is now on a journey west to make her own living, right? Her parents end up dead. She now has no place to go, so she runs off west in hopes that she can make a life for herself. So this is very much a Western, very much a travel story. We get to see different people, see different things. I still love one thing about Rae Carson, and that is that her characters grow over time and change and alter, and we get to see new facets of a character that we haven't seen before. So I definitely love that sort of character development. I'm not quite sure I love this series as much as I love the other one, but again, that might be personal preference because I tend to love fantasy a lot, and I don't tend to gravitate towards things that take place in a past era that is your Western sort of. So this takes place in the past in a Western society, and I don't tend to like those because I don't constantly want to be reminded about how awful it was for people like me. So I love this book. I love how Rae Carson handles it. I love how she handles like the Western idea, how she handles being in the past, having to deal with sexism and racism and all of those sort of things. But again, I don't think it can top a fantasy for me because I don't know. All right, it's just so good. And I'm still on the last book, but yeah, these are really good. So next we have Wink Poppy Midnight by April Genevieve Tolkill. I don't know. Anyway, this book was pretty interesting to me. I was really confused through it, whether or not it was an urban fantasy or just a contemporary because of the way the story was told. I'm pretty sure it's just a contemporary, but the kind of fairy tale-ish style that this story is telling sort of makes you wonder whether or not it truly is. I ended up liking this book. I hear a lot of mixed opinions about this book, a lot of people who don't like this book, who don't like how it went, but I, surprisingly enough, after hearing all of those things, really enjoyed this book. I didn't have a point where I was like, oh, this book is garbage. I appreciate it for what it was. So this is about 3 people, Wink, Poppy, and Midnight, and their story together, of how they come together, of how they interact with each other, of how their stories connect. So we get to hear from this perspective of all 3, and we get to see how their stories tie in at the end. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was a weird, interesting story. It wasn't like really like, ooh, a mystery or anything, but I liked how intriguing it was to me, and I liked that not all of the characters were lovable or likable, and then even those unlikable, unlovable characters, it turns out, were pretty okay. Like, there was some sort of humanity, like, you know how humans are both good and bad? You got to see that, and I like stories where it just makes me see everything in various shades of gray. So I really like this book, and I don't know, it wasn't like a 5-star book, but it wasn't like a 1-star book. I was just like, ooh, that's something interesting. I was intrigued by this book. So therefore I can't say I didn't like it because it was intriguing. We're coming to the end. This is the second to last book. It's Elusive by Emily Lloyd Jones, and this was a book I didn't like. I'm just gonna say it. I'm not surprised I didn't like it. I bought this a year and a half ago. Yeah. A year and a half ago I bought this book, or maybe even 2 years ago I bought this book. And I had started it then, and I had put it aside because I was like, nope, not feeling it. And I picked it up again, got it on audio, figured, hey, if I read it on audiobook, I might not DNF it so fast. Had to listen to it because it was the only audiobook I had for a 5-hour drive. And I didn't like it. It follows in a world where they got some sort of disease and then they got a shot to cure the disease, but the shot that cures the disease that they had ends up awakening a gene in certain people that gives them some powers, and there are like 5, 6, 7 categories of what type of power you could get, and we follow a group of people who happen to have this power, and they do a heist. And yeah, that's basically the basic premise, is people with powers do a heist and then the government's against them. And I was so bored. Like, first I was just like, oh my gosh, this is boring. Then I was like, this isn't clearly explained. And then I was like, the world's not fully developed. Then I was like, these characters aren't fully developed. And then I was like, this character's dumb. And that's where it really stuck me. It was, the character was an idiot. So I couldn't ignore everything else that I didn't like in the book, because the main character was dull as a bag of bricks, which I couldn't understand because you were being raised by a criminal mastermind. So, you know, there are some points where I was just like, she's smart in some ways, but she's just like, woo, in other ways, and I could not stand her, and some of the pacing, and some of the character interaction, and some of the tropes, and some of the non-world building, and overall I didn't like the book. There's not much more I can say. So the last book that I'm going to mention that I read in December of 2017 is Under a Painted Sky by Stacey Lee. I read this one in audiobook. It was really, really good. Like, this is one of those books where I was like, girl, you look so pretty, you better be pretty on the inside too. And she was. This is a book that I truly enjoyed, which was surprising to me because, as I have mentioned constantly, I tend not to like books that take place in the past if that past is a Western past, because they didn't treat them people that look like me so pretty. Like, they were pretty awful, right? They were racist and sexist and horrible in ways that it hits too close to home for me to truly enjoy. But this book, while taking place in a time period in which I more than likely would be murdered on the first day, was very, very, very good. And you want to know why? Because the author acknowledged, like the rest of us, that more than white people existed in those time periods. So our main character is a Chinese American, and her father has just died in a fire, and she decides she's gonna make her life out west. She's gonna go look for gold, and she ends up running away with a slave girl named Andy, and they end up making off together to the west to try to find new lives for themselves. They come across a band of cowboys, and we just get to see this awesome relationship of this girl and her journey of her relationship with the others. And we get to see a Mexican guy, we get to see a black girl, we get to see a Chinese girl, and we get to see all of them exist in the West, you know, in a Western. And they're respectable, nice, smart, entertaining, lovable characters who aren't laughed at and ridiculed and made jokes of. And it was just really nice. Like, of course we have to deal with like racism and sexism and that sort of thing, but overall the book and the way that it just treated these things and just how progressive it was for how the characters reacted, but in a way that felt natural and not forced, was really, 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 really good. Like, I got to see characters where I would be like, oh, okay, if I lived in that time, then at least this dude wouldn't try to murder and sell me or something. Like, you know, there's a little hope there if I ever time traveled that I would be respected in some sort of way. Like, you know, that's all I want in life. So, definitely a good book. Definitely loved it. So now, 30 minutes later, I finally finished telling you about all the books I read in December. This really makes me making book opinion videos a lot harder. I think this was 17 books that I read. That was a lot of books. That was a lot of books. I can't say I'm too sad about it because there were a lot of amazing books and a lot of not so amazing books, but a lot of amazing books, and that's what matters, is that at the end of 2017, I ended the year strong. I'm really proud of myself. Pat on the back for me for reading so much books, but I'm just so proud of myself. I'm so happy that soon I won't have TBR bookcases, but we'll soon have just a TBR shelf, and that is the most exciting prospect for me. So here's to 2017 and all the amazing books I read, and that one horrible book that can burn in hell for all I care. But otherwise, it was a good year for reading, and I can't wait for the new year and all the new books that I get to potentially read and tell you about. So if you like what you're seeing here and you want to continue to see more, click all those bunnies down below, and goodbye, Internet.